right, the Battle of the Wilderness. This is going to be the first time that General Grant and General Lee have fought each other. It's May 5th and 6th, 1864, fourth bloodiest battle of the war. Um, Grant has been having a lot of success in the Western theater, and Lee has had enormous success in the East. Like I said, it's 10 months after Gettysburg, which is Lee's only defeat during the war. And General Meade, who was at Gettysburg, followed up by being defeated by Lee at Mine Run, suffering twice as many casualties as Lee. To be fair, Meade did not do anything everyone before him hadn't done. McDowell lost at Bull Run, the first Manassas. Then McClellan took over, and what happened there. And Lincoln replaces him with Pope, who had had success in the West, and he got humiliated at Second Manassas. He outnumbered Jackson almost 3-1 at one point, but when Lee arrived on the second day, he nearly routed the entire Northern Army. And they had Act Two of McClellan, and then Burnside, who lost over 12,000 men to Lee's 4,000 at Fredericksburg, is the most lopsided loss of the war, until Grant lost over 10,000 at Cold Harbor to Lee's 1,500. So after Burnside was Hooker, who lost 7,000 men in the same woods that Grant's about to fight in at Chancellorsville. In fact, when Grant's men cross the Rapidan River and they're in the wilderness woods, they can see thousands of skeletons all over the ground, wearing blue. A lot of them were shallow graves that had washed out with the rains in April, and a lot of them were men that they just never found as they retreated a year ago from Chancellorsville. So it's a very eerie feeling for the North to camp in those woods. Now, they do not want to fight in the wilderness. That's the last place that Grant wants to fight, um, because it takes away his advantage in artillery, and it takes away his large units of cavalry. You can still use them dismounted as infantry, but the woods are so thick that it's almost impossible to ride horses through it in an organized fashion or pull anything with wheels. There are very few roads. The ones that are there look like bike paths, and this is not where he wants to fight, but it's exactly where Lee wants to fight. Grant, when he came over after Meade had lost at Mine Run, Grant's pulled over to kind of cow prod Meade into attacking. Lincoln wanted a general that was willing to fight. He knew the cruel math of war, that they could lose 2, even 3 times as many men and still win, because they had so many more people and could replace them easily. Grant reorganizes his army, and he does have an issue. One veteran is worth 10 green guys, and while he has a huge army, he does not have a lot of veterans, and a lot of them are about to leave because their 3 years of service is up. So to combat this, he does 2 things. First, $400 bonus for anybody that reenlists. Secondly, if you have at least, I think it was 70%, 75% of the people of your regiment re-enlist, then you get to keep your colors and keep your numbers. And that put pressure on the men. That meant a lot to them, because the ones who were staying pressured the others to stay so they could keep their regimental designation and colors. So about half of the 50,000 men that Grant had that were up for their furlough still left, but about 26,000 stayed. And he has other troops that have fought before. Those are just the only ones that have been there for 3 years. And he has a lot of new people. Grant goes to the defenses of Washington and plucks a lot of these guys who've been having a cozy position all war with the heavy artillery deep in the north. And he grabs these cavalrymen that have done nothing but endless parades and puts a rifle in a hand and makes them march south. So he's got a giant army, over 120,000 people, but a huge portion of them are not very good, or not very experienced at least. Lee on the other side is 2 of his corps with him, Richard Ewell and A.P. Hill, 30,000, 22,000. and Longstreet is on the way with 10,000 more. Now, Lee, what he did that is really amazing is sucker Grant into the wilderness in the first place. And how he did this is amazing because Grant's not an idiot. It wasn't easy to fool him, but he did. Lee had some of his wagons head for the North Anna River, and even a little cavalry screen with them, and they're empty, of course. It was all a ruse, but they set out misinformation, and Grant thought that Lee was retreating to the North Anna River, where it would be very difficult for Grant to cross, and he could set up a entrenchment on the other side and make it hard for him. But Lee was marching 3/4 of his army right at Grant to catch him in the wilderness. And Lee knew where Grant was going to cross the river because he could sit up on top of this mountain here, Clark's Mountain, and watch him. So he watched him going toward Germanna and Ely Ford, which was perfect as it led right into the wilderness. When you're standing on top of this mountain, you can actually see the wilderness. Now, the wilderness is unique for a bunch of reasons. It's not just thick woods, it's a second growth forest. They had found iron there ages ago, and they stripped the land and cut out almost all of the trees, and it had regrown, but it had regrown as a bunch of smaller trees packed closer together, a lot of underbrush, a lot of just blackberry bushes. It's very susceptible to fire, which is what had happened at Chancellorsville to Hooker, getting trapped in there, and a lot of his wounded burning alive. So Grant does not want to fight here. He wants to get out in the open where he can use his huge advantage in cannons, and that's exactly why Lee does want to fight there. And Lee suckers him into it. So this is an actual photo of Germanna Ford. This is one of the easiest places to cross the Rapidan River. And Lee lets him cross the river. It's really easy to set up a defense next to a river and make it take forever to cross. But he wants Grant to think that he's retired to a different river, and he wants him to cross. And as soon as he gets about 2/3 of his guys across, he wants to destroy him in the wilderness. And when Lee is on top of that mountain, he can see this gray patch of land surrounded by all this lush green forest. And he points it out to his other generals and said, that's where we're going to make him bleed. And they all understand why. So the first to cross is Hancock, who goes across Ely Ford, which is sort of off this map, right at the top center. And he's well across. Then is Warren, and then most of Sedgwick. And that's when Lee starts to march up the Orange Turnpike straight at Warren with Ewell's Corps. And Grant does know there's some Confederates in the area, but he thinks it's only a division, which is it's actually a corps, so there's 3 times that coming up the Orange Turnpike. And then he's got Hill with his 22,000 coming up Plank Road. And he figures as soon as Ewell and Warren start to fight, that Sedgwick will be rushed to help Warren, and Hancock will be doubled back to help as well. And he wants to hit Hancock with A.P. Hill's men, and then have Longstreet come up the Brock Road. Longstreet's guys are still a day away, and land right on Hancock's flank, figuring that the crossroads of Plank Road and Brock Road in that vicinity will be where the battle lines will be drawn. And he was right about all of this. So the first bit of fighting, Ewell sent his special forces forward, and they were hiding in ditches covered with leaves and would pop up and shoot the Union soldiers, and then just be out of sight in the thick woods. And they're kind of leading them to this area called Saunders Field. And Saunders Field is where the battle is really going to take place. Warren was pushed hard by Grant to attack, thinking it was only a division, but he was actually facing a force as big as his own, at least until Sedgwick could get there to help him. And Saunders Field is a disaster for the North. what ends up happening, here's the real Saunders Field today, is they attack on across the field, but also on the north and south side of that road. That road's running basically west to east, um, and a giant line across all of it, a big wave to try to engulf this what they think is a division. And they don't skip the field. Somebody's got to go across it. Otherwise, they'd have a giant gap in their line, and they could be easily outflanked. So he tries to push about 20 regiments across this field, and it's sort of a mix of new guys and veterans. And on the north end, going through the woods, they run into the Stonewall Brigade, which is Walker's boys from Virginia, and then Stafford, who's got 5 regiments from Louisiana, and they're all known to be quite insanely vicious and successful so far in the war. And they completely roll the North back and send them across Saunders Field, basically slaughter them. The 2 units from Pennsylvania in the back there were basically disintegrated. But the rest of the North, right down the middle and on the south side of the road, they're able to punch through the line. And this is the thinnest part of Ewell's line. But he sends reinforcements in, and they push him back across the field, which the Yankees called running the gauntlet. Saunders Field is one of the hot spots the first hour of the Wilderness, and Grant will lose over 4,000 men just in the first 40 minutes of this fight. So he basically got his nose broken on the first punch, and they're still going to slug it out for another 2 days. General Gordon, with a group of people from Georgia, all of his regiments are from Georgia, is able to push through what's left of the Iron Brigade and the new recruits that they stuck in it. The Iron Brigade was decimated the first day of Gettysburg, but there's still some of them around. And these Georgians push them back and out of their trench and into the woods. And they find themselves in a weird position where they're actually in the Union trench, and there's a blue line north of them and a blue line south of them. Mm-hmm. So they wheel around into an equal sign and charge opposite directions from each other. And this is devastating because these Union soldiers were already fighting Confederates at their front. So now they're getting fired on from 2 different directions. It's a crossfire, and the tips of those lines kind of crumble and fall back, and a lot of prisoners are taken. So there's a lot of back and forth, but this is one of the few real breakthroughs in the early morning part of this battle. So at the moment, the South is winning because of the disaster at Saunders Field, and then this fairly successful attack by Gordon and others. So Warren is basically repulsed in the middle at Saunders Field and at the north end of his line, and then later in the day the south end of his line is turned back. So it's not going well. Ewell's beating Warren's troops, and they're about evenly matched for numbers at this point. But Sedgwick is rushing to Warren's aid, and some of his regiments are slowed down by like a pesky cavalry unit that was just trying to keep him away while Ewell finished off Warren, and they come sprinting back down the road, and Ewell is now fighting Sedgwick and Warren, but Warren's guys are pretty beaten. They haven't fled yet, but they're pretty well beaten. Ewell decides he's done enough damage, and when Sedgwick gets there, they fight a little bit, and he backs off and just digs in, pretty much in a line near Saunders Field where he'd started the contest in the morning. And the Union go to the other side of Saunders Field and dig in. So on the northwest part of the battlefield, you basically have a stalemate where Ewell and Warren and Sedgwick are all dug in. Nobody wants to run across Saunders Field, and nobody wants to attack someone who's dug in. So they're sharpshooting each other. There's a couple flare-ups, but by about 4 in the afternoon, it goes silent on the north side, except for a few pop shots. And the battle turns to A.P. Hill's corps versus Hancock. Now that Sedgwick is in line with Warren, they have got 67,000 troops against Ewell's 33, and Hancock's got 50,000 versus Hill's 22,000. And feeling that Ewell's too well dug in for any major assaults, Meade and Grant decided to take 5,000 from a little bit from Warren, mostly from Sedgwick, and they move them to assist Hancock. It's about 5,000 extra guys. So, and they're going to arrive kind of on the far left of Hill, so they might be able to turn that flank. And Hill has cut logs and dug in, and he's got 22,000 versus now 55,000, and he doesn't have a field for them to cross. So they're dug in very near to each other, blasting a murderous fire, and both are getting cut down at a huge rate. But he holds on until darkness kind of saves him, and he's got a huge force at his front and another one at his left. But Longstreet has arrived, and Lee has rerouted him to come right up behind Hill, just in case Hill cracks. Longstreet's guys will be there, and they know that in the morning is going to be terrible for A.P. Hill. They're not too concerned for Ewell. He's a pretty safe position, so they ask him attack before dawn, because the Yankees are going to attack at dawn. Attack in the dark, and try to make something happen to relieve some pressure from A.P. Hill. The one thing that they do, that Ewell does do, is his guys are able to figure out. He had a lot of woodsmen. I mean, they are Confederate soldiers, and he figured out where the headquarters were and all the officers for the Union Army. And it had a lot of pickets and guards, but they drug one artillery piece through briars and all this for hours, late into the night, and got it right up front where it needed to be. And to open the contest at 4:15 a.m., before the sun's even up, they pressed up real close and trained the guns on the headquarters. And they fired, and the first shot actually killed 3 horses and a staff officer, and was within 20 feet from getting Grant. So that kind of wakes up the Yankees, and they start fighting on Ewell's front, but it never gets too heavy, because both sides kind of know what's going to happen if you charge these entrenchments. So the attack goes on with A.P. Hill without any assistance from Ewell, really, but Longstreet is on his way. A.P. Hill's guys are running out of ammunition and starting to fall back, and Lee tells them, just give ground, don't wait until you completely panic, go ahead, start falling back. Longstreet's here, and he's on his way up. Fall back to the Widow Tap farm. I've got a surprise for the Yankees. And what Lee had done is set up 12 cannons in this little field called the Widow Tap farm. He set it up himself and loaded it with canister. And the Union did push back. This was probably the most success the Union had in the 2 days, was pushing A.P. Hill back in the morning, but he was letting them. And then he was supposed to reform at Widow Tap farm, and right about that time, Longstreet's guys should meet him there. And they did. And the Yankees came out of the woods, and there's like a small hill that they crested, and they saw those 12 artillery pieces, and they're firing this stuff, canister, and it just cut them down, and kind of stifled the attack. At the same time, Longstreet's guys have arrived, and first it was a group of Texans under Gregg, and they got hit hard because the Union didn't. The momentum was still in the North's favor even after this little bit of canister, and they hit the first couple of groups at Longstreet. They were still winning on that side, but as more of Longstreet's guys got there, they turned the tide, and Perry's Alabamians, like the 3rd Brigade to get there, they're a large brigade. Not all the brigades have the same number of people, and they're armed with Springfields, which is what a lot of the Northerners had too. And one regiment from that brigade was able to turn two Union regiments that were full of new people and make them panic and run on Hancock's right. And then they're able to defeat an entire brigade under a guy named Stone for the North and make them run. So these Alabamians are really wild and have, on par weapons with the North. So when they get there, it really pushes Hancock back. And then Longstreet's informed that Hancock has left his left wing completely open, which is strange because Hancock is not an idiot. He's a good general. But his right has just about collapsed, as you can see with this map, and now his left is about to collapse because Longstreet lines up 5,000 guys, one brigade from each of his divisions there, and Hills as well, I mean, and launches them right on Hancock's flank. He didn't have it anchored on a creek or anything. It was just hanging in the wind, and that devastated Hancock, and his guys will retreat to earthworks they built along Rock Road and even be pushed a little further back than that. It's total chaos for him. And right at this glorious hour, Longstreet is accidentally shot by his own troops from Mahone's brigade of Virginians shot him, and Longstreet's from Virginia too. Went through his neck and into his shoulder. He lived, and he'll come back and fight, but not today. And it was a lot of confusion where the wilderness is so thick that and hard to move that friendly fire happened a lot that day on both ways, and some of the outflanking units had pursued the Yankees too far and had gotten in perpendicular of some of the other Confederates, and they were told, have a rebel yell, charge down the flank, and do as much damage as you can. And then everyone else, when you hear this happen, you rise up, yell, and attack. And the shockwave of that just made the Union left crumble, and they got rolled. But these guys, Wolford, Mahone, Anderson, Stone, they ended up shooting some of Bryan's men, as you can see on this map. And Longstreet rode up to stop that, yelling their friends, and got shot himself. After that, they are able to shuffle people around, kind of shift everybody on to the left, and get in a more of an L shape. They charged again and pushed the Yankees all the way back to Brock Road. By then it was 6 o'clock. Darkness was at 6:50. They were pretty satisfied with what they had done. They had captured a ton of prisoners. Everyone's congratulating each other. The enemy had been whipped. Lee wanted to see if there was anything more Ewell could do in the last hour, and when he gets there, Gordon is chomping at the bit, saying that Sedgwick has left his flank dangling in the wind. And Early, who was his superior, and then Ewell, didn't believe it because they didn't think Grant would be that stupid, or Sedgwick. It's surprising enough that Hancock has been outflanked severely, first on his right and then even worse on his left. Warren had been outflanked the day before, and now it's Sedgwick's turn. And this one is the most devastating attack of all, and it's right at the end. It's just kind of an extra punch while they're down. They roll, same thing they did with Longstreet. They roll right down the flank, rebel yell, attack. Everyone else does the same. They catch them in a crossfire and totally destroy Sedgwick. And they go running for the hills. Two of the brigades are captured entirely or killed. There's about 1,200 casualties just in the last half hour, and two for the North, at a cost of only 50 men to Gordon. So it's disaster for the North. And two of the brigadier generals are captured. Shaler is the more hated of the two, and he used to run a prison that had some of Johnson's guys in it, officers' prison, and starved him and was cruel. And now he's going to go to prison. And when he gets there, they send him to Libby Prison in Richmond, and then somewhere in Georgia, and then they let him go a year later. But I'm sure that it was not a good time for him. Um, there's some resistance by the North when they're getting outflanked. They run back pretty much all the way to the Orange Turnpike, and they're able to kind of stabilize. But there's only because there's 2 minutes left of daylight by the time they pushed them back that far, and you can't fight in the wilderness at night. Especially, I mean, you can barely see what's going on during the day. Uh, the nightmares are not over for Grant, though. That night, the wind kicked up and started fires again and burned his wounded again under this huge tract of land that they just retreated across, getting shot along the way, and a ton of people burned to death. Rescue attempts are made again by both sides, and they didn't care north or south that they would found you, they would help you. Both sides would help both sides in that situation. And then the next day they try to shoot each other. It's crazy. Um, Grant, when he learns that Sedgwick has stabilized, across the creek, and that Hancock has done the same at Brock Road, and they haven't been completely annihilated, he walks into his tent, and I don't know if it was like relief from it being over or if he was sad about all the people's lives he lost, or his friend Hayes, one of his personal friends that was a general, had been killed, or what it was. But Grant broke down and cried and threw himself face first on the bed, and they said they'd never seen anybody so unhinged. His officers did, and you know he lost 18,000 people, and Lee had only lost 7,500. He had been outflanked. All of his corps had been outflanked badly, and it was a disaster for the North. He got whooped. There's pretty much no possible way Lee could have done better considering the odds. But in the morning, rather than get whipped, go north, recuperate for a few months, calm down, get whipped again, which is what had been going on for 3 years, with the one exception of Gettysburg. Um, he will turn around and just get whipped again. At Spotsylvania, he'll lose another 18,000. He finally had Lee out in the open, and the results are the same. He does a little bit better, as this time Lee lost like 9,000. And Grant will follow that up with Cold Harbor, which is the biggest disaster of the war for the North. He just basically sacrificed 10,000 men for nothing and barely did anything to Lee. He also did lose the Battle of North Anna River. There was a fight there eventually, and they settled in on a siege. He knew that if they kept fighting, even if they were getting outmaneuvered on the battlefield and losing twice as many guys, like literally twice as many, and they did, sometimes more, that they would still win as long as they continued to fight. And the day after the Battle of the Wilderness, they were marching toward Chancellorsville, where there's a crossroad there, and they were all expecting to go north because Grant had built bridges across the Rapidan River, but they weren't for the army. They were for the wounded. He was just getting them out of there and trying to get them, if possible, to a hospital somewhere up north, instead of a field tent, And they took a right at Chancellorsville instead of a left. And when they did, his entire army cheered, even though they'd just been destroyed again. They all knew it. It was the obvious strategy. It's hard to implement that strategy when it means so much death for your own army. So the North really sacrificed a lot to win this war and bring the South back into the Union. Not that the South didn't. I mean, they couldn't replace their guys. They were down to the last, boys and men that were old enough to pick up a gun were out there, and they were doing well against all odds. But they had Lee, and that's the difference. Anyway, this was kind of the beginning of the end. which is weird um, because it's a massive victory for the South, and yet it marks the beginning of the end. And it's followed by another massive victory and another massive victory. But each time they won, they lost. It's uh, a weird campaign, and I think Lincoln and Grant, and I think Lee knew it too, as he said he did. They knew what was going to happen, how it was going to unfold. They were just hoping that the Northern public didn't have the backbone to stomach that much death. Former General McClellan was running against Lincoln, and all hopes for the South were on McClellan winning because he was a Peace Party candidate. And so Lee was just trying to kill as many Yankees as he could. And I don't think he could have killed more than he did. This is Libby Prison, where it was just officers. Yankee officers were in there, and they had a lot of time on their hands. These are some bracelets and belt buckles they made out of bones from beef. I'm not sure what they used to chisel into the bone, but I was impressed with their artwork. Maybe they should have gone into making jewelry instead of being Yankee officers. Some of them, for sure, should have chosen a different career. It is sad how many people died to the absolute stupidity of Northern Command. And it took years for them to kind of get rid of all those politically appointed hacks and get some guys in there that knew what they were doing. Even though they still lost against Lee, they at least had some success elsewhere out west and other places. So anyway, that is the Battle of the Wilderness.